Hey, Stacey David here, and this is the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals since 1919. That's right, over 100 years building tools and still going strong. If you need tools, check them out. You won't be disappointed. All right, let's get rolling. All right, we've got a question here from Ronnie, and Ronnie is down in Laredo, and he says he is thinking about building a 68 Firebird using one of these reproduction bodies. And his question is, how good are these, and is that a wise thing to do? What do you know about these reproduction bodies? Have you used one? Have you done anything with them? What am I getting into? Great question, Ronnie. First of all, let me start off by saying that the reproduction bodies that are out there now, by companies like Dynacorn and Year One carries them. There's a lot of companies that carry the steel reproduction bodies for certain muscle cars or 55 Chevys or Broncos or things like that. I think Dennis Carpenter's got one for Bronco. These are great. I mean, these have absolutely changed the way the restoration and aftermarket and hot rod world operate. Without these bodies, I mean, we were at a standstill on some of these. People were still looking for old parts out of junkyards, and all of a sudden these reproduction bodies started becoming available and reproduction body panels. And man, it completely changed it. So that's great. You hear a big but coming here, though. The drawback to any reproduction part is the same as any reproduction part. Whether you get it from the OEM or from the aftermarket is the fitment. And for me to explain this properly, I'm going to take you into what it takes to stamp a body or body panels. So basically, what an OEM does when they decide to build a car and they've come up with the design of it, they will build molds or dies out of metal for stamping pieces of sheet metal into the shape of the fenders and the hood and these kind of things, and then the car will be assembled with these pieces. The way that these dies work, take your left hand and take your index finger and put it down to your thumb and make a OK sign. Now take your other three fingers and roll them down, kind of like you're holding on to a handlebar. Okay, you got it? Now take your right hand index finger and stick it in the hole with your thumb and index finger. Now I know you're thinking that's kind of creepy in a weird sexual kind of way. And that's not, there's actually a reason for this. Basically what you're seeing is the concept of a die or a stamp. You have the female version, which is the hand with the circle, and then you have the index finger. And what that is when the metal comes together, it stamps the pieces. Now that we understand how that works, as a piece of metal stamps another piece of metal, you get wear. And so these stampings or these dies eventually start to wear to where the shape is not as accurate as it used to be. And this happens with OEM dies. That's why every certain amount of time, I don't know what, just depends on how much they use it, they replace those dies with a new one and they discard the old ones. Now, when the OEMs decide to quit making a car body, say a 68 Mustang, when they decided to do away with that body style, they either sold those dies or they destroyed them. Now, if you bought those dies, keep in mind they're worn down. So even if you started stamping fenders with those dies, they're not going to fit real well. They're going to be a little off. Now, any body man knows that no matter what replacement body panels you get, whether they're from OEM or aftermarket, you have to tweak them a little bit. Nothing just bolts right on. Why? Because of what I just explained. The stampings are not perfect and they wear. So there's always a little bit of discrepancy with the fitment. That's why your fenders need to be shimmed. That's why doors need to be adjusted on every single car. I can take a a brand new truck or an older truck or a square body Chevy or a 55 Chevy or whatever, and take one of the body panels off, like a front fender, and put on another one, an OEM fender, and I guarantee you whatever shimming is on that will probably have to be changed due to the different fender. That's just how it is. And every body man knows that. Every restoration guy knows that. So what I'm trying to get across is that you have to tweak these panels no matter what. But now, that's the OEM. So let's set that aside for a second. Now let's go into the reproduction bodies. Since they didn't develop the bodies and they didn't build the originals, what they do, say they want to make a body for a 70 CUDA. They find the straightest, cleanest 70 CUDA body that they can, and then they disassemble it, and they basically re-engineer it based off of the existing technology. So they will take, say, a hood, and they'll pull all of the bracing out of it, and each one of those braces will be reproduced. And then the hood, there'll be a mold made off of that hood for a new stamping. But keep in mind, that stamping is of that particular hood, which may not fit exactly on every CUDA, which it won't, based on what I just said. But anyway, so that will be their stamping. So basically, you're getting a copy of a copy. And just like with recording or anything, photographs, every time you make a copy, it gets a little less quality. And so what a lot of these aftermarket companies will do is that they will take and make a stamping off an original piece, and they'll go back in, they'll stamp a hood and they'll put it on an original body, and they'll go, oh, okay, these creases aren't right here. These need to be sharper. This needs to be over a 1/16 of an inch, blah, blah, blah. And they will tweak their own molds and make them as perfect as they can. That's the real high quality stuff. But even then, there's going to be some discrepancy. Okay, so now every single panel that makes up a body shell has to be taken apart, and every single one of those panels have to be stamped following the process that I just gave you. Very time-consuming and very expensive. Very expensive. Any body shell like that can have anywhere from 50 to 100 pieces that make up, a stamping here, stamping there, and each one of those braces and panels all are integral to building that body. Then it's all spot welded together in the proper way. So there's a lot that goes into this, but as you can see, the point I'm trying to get across is there's so much margin for error in any of this, even an OEM body, that you have to understand once you get that reproduction body, it's not going to fit perfect. You're going to have to spend some time on it. Now, let me go into one other thing. These reproduction bodies were designed to be exactly what the title says, reproduction bodies. So what you're talking about a 68 Firebird, these were originally designed for if somebody owned a 68 Firebird and it was rusted out, that you would go in, buy one of these bodies, drop it on there, and put all your OEM fenders and doors, your factory original pieces on the body shell, and it would fit much better. If you put reproduction parts all the way around, you start running into these discrepancies on every single panel. Now, let me show you how this can add up. Okay, so you put on one body panel, say a fender, and it's off, a 32nd of an inch. Okay, that's nothing. And then you put on another piece that connects to it, and it's off a 32nd. Now you're 1/16 of an inch off. And it keeps going, and then pretty soon you get over to the last panel and you got a gap of a 1/4 inch. And you're like, well, where did that gap come from? And what it is that each of those are adding up. So what you have to do is hand fit every panel as the vehicle will go together. Very time consuming, very expensive if you're doing it for a customer. And most people, this is beyond their skill level. So I say that just to prepare you for any of these aftermarket parts. It's not that they're bad. They're the best that you can get, and it's much better than having nothing and starting with just a completely rusted out piece of junk. But you also have to be realistic about what you're going to get here, Ronnie, and what kind of work is going to have to go into it. Now, one other thing I want to bring up about these reproduction bodies. Most of these were not designed. The idea for the reproduction body was not, I repeat, not made to build a car from the ground up out of reproduction parts. It was built as a replacement body. So what has happened is guys have taken these, like you're talking about doing, and just built a 68 Firebird. Well, there's no VIN tag on it. It's not a real car, and it will never be a real 68 Firebird. Another thing that you're going to be up against is most of these reproduction bodies do not come with an MSO, which is a manufacturer's certificate of origin. And that is a document that looks like a title. That's what you get with a kit car. That's what you get with a component car, from somebody like RCR or Factory 5 or something like that. And you can take that down and you can get a title with that. And that basically says that this company builds these bodies and that you can make a car out of it. If you don't have that, you have no paperwork on this at all, which means you're going to have to take the car down and it will have to be inspected as a new car and go through an inspection before they will do any kind of VIN tag on it. That's a tough deal because there's a lot of people that don't even do that because they don't have the personnel that will walk around. But I guarantee you, when they do get the right person, it's a very time-consuming thing. I mean, they'll go over every inch of that car. Paperwork becomes very, very important. We did a whole thing on the show last year about, getting your paperwork straight and what to do when it gets upside down. I don't want to see you get into a situation. So to bring this kind of to a close, the reproduction bodies are great for what they are, but make sure that if you do one, you're aware of the amount of work that's going to go into it. Also, you need to be aware of all the extra parts that you will not have that you will have to buy. Basically, a reproduction body is the body shell. So every single fastener, bolt, nut, screw, washer, receptacle, this, headlight, that, switches, levers, everything you'll have to buy separately. That is really expensive. So my suggestion would be to find yourself a 68 Firebird and restore it. And if you get something that's rusty, then get a reproduction body and put it down on there. But start out with a real car. That would be my advice to you on that one. Hope that helps. Good luck to you. Send us a picture of what you're doing. I talked to a guy the other day, and it wasn't too long before we started talking tools. That always comes up. And he said the stuff on the trucks are just too darn expensive, man. It's just for rich people. And I laughed and I asked him how valuable his time was. And he said he didn't understand the question. And I explained that the more time he spends messing around with cheap, crappy tools, the more time you waste getting nothing done. And time is a commodity we all have in limited supply. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, maybe I'll look into some of those tools on a truck. He won't be disappointed, neither will you. Check him out. Okay, I've got a question in front of me that we actually get quite a bit. This is from Randy, and he wants to convert a 96 F250 two-wheel drive into a four-wheel drive. And he asks, are the parts bolt in? And then he says, is there anybody around Middle Tennessee that would want to do it for me? Oh, that's a funny question. No, Randy, you have to do this yourself. This is something you need to do yourself. No, honestly, this is a really big job. And we have covered this before. I'm going to walk through it again really quick. Converting a two-wheel drive to a four-wheel drive is not as simple as people think. And generally, the first thing I tell people is sell your two-wheel drive and buy a four-wheel drive. It's much easier and much cheaper. Now, obviously, the exceptions to that rule would be if you have a special truck, a 66 Chevy or something, and you want that exact truck. So then you have to go through the process of converting it or building it into a four-wheel drive. But let's talk about this as far as more of a later model vehicle. His first question is very pertinent. Is it a bolt-in deal? And the answer to that is pretty much yes. But you're going to have to find pretty much a complete donor vehicle to make sure you get all of those little tiny pieces that will absolutely nickel and dime you to death if you don't have them. So let's kind of go through the list here. First of all, converting a two-wheel drive to a four-wheel drive, you need to decide your engine. Let's just start at the top here. Are you going to keep the same engine? And the reason I say that is if you're going to drop in a V8, that adds a whole nother aspect of cooling systems and motor mounts, all of that kind of thing. But let's just say you're keeping the same engine. Okay, so once you've established what engine you're going to do, now you need to move to the four-wheel drive transmission and transfer case. Those obviously are different in a four-wheel drive. So you need the whole setup. If you're using an automatic transmission, you need that transmission because it will have a flange on the back to bolt the transfer case to, which is different. So you'll need that out of a four-wheel drive truck. If it's a stick, you'll need the clutch and the pedals and all the stuff that goes with that. So most people just do an automatic conversion. But you will need the transmission, the transfer case, and the cross members. A lot of people get the transmission or they'll buy it off of eBay or something, and all you get is the transmission and the transfer case. Well, the cross member that those bolt to is different in a two-wheel drive and a four-wheel drive. So you need all that hardware. The cross members, any little cabling and bracketry and all that stuff, you need all of that. Then you need a matching front and rear axle. Now, a lot of people think, well, I'll just keep my stock axle in the rear and slap on a front four-wheel drive axle. Well, you can do that as long as the gear ratios match and the rear axle is what you want. But a lot of times a four-wheel drive, depending on what axles you're going to, a lot of times you're going to a 6 or 8 lug, axle, a Dana 60 or whatever. If you're putting four-wheel drive under it, you probably want a bigger axle. And that may not be compatible with your stock rear axle. So I always recommend getting the matching front and rear axles out of a donor vehicle with a matching gear ratio. Now, you can't just get the axles. You need to get the suspension that holds those axles. Now, there is a chance that the leaf spring, say you have a leaf spring rear end, there's a chance that the rear end will bolt in and have the same width and distance for the spring pads. But there's a chance they might not. You got to do a lot of research here. That's why having a donor vehicle is such a big thing here. But the front suspension is totally different. Your two-wheel drive would be an independent front suspension. Chances are you're going to a solid axle in the front, which means you're going to have to add leaf springs or a 4-link or whatever suspension you're going to put in there. So this is a big job for just the suspension. This is the biggest fabricating part of this project. All right, now you're going to need drive shafts that are going to connect that transfer case to those axles. And the chances of you finding something in a donor vehicle are pretty slim unless the wheelbase is exactly the same. So factor in some new drive shafts. Now you'll need to do an exhaust system. And the stock exhaust system that was in your two-wheel drive truck, now I promise you, is not going to fit because of all the pieces you've added. You've added a different transmission. You've added a transfer case. You got drive shafts going every place. So factor in a custom exhaust system. Now that's just the underneath. Now we get up into the cab. Obviously, you're going to need the 4x4 control levers that come up through the floor or however you go from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive. So you need all that. Once again, this is where a donor vehicle is absolutely key. And then the final thing is your wheels and tires. Obviously, you're going to upgrade those. So those need to be factored in. So, and this is just a quick jump. There's a lot of little pieces here that I'm leaving out. So this is a big project. And if you haven't done this before, I don't recommend you jumping into this as your first project. And if you go, there's a lot of reputable four-wheel drive shops and stuff that can do this, but it's not going to be cheap. And the first thing they will ask you is, do you have a donor vehicle? So they don't have to try to hunt this stuff down or fabricate it. Because if you got people that are going to fabricate all these cross members and everything, you're going to spend some serious coin here. So anyway, it can be done. I've done it many times. I just want to make sure that you're seeing this for what it really is before you just jump into it. It would be much better if you just sold your two-wheel drive truck and found the four-wheel drive you wanted and then just upgraded that. You know, there's a couple things I do want to add to my answer there to Randy. You know, one of the good things about the approach that he's wanting to do is that he's trying to make it a bolt-in thing. And usually what that means is that way you can take the vehicle down and you can pull the parts off when they go bad, take them to the local auto parts store, and buy a replacement part. So it's almost like it's a factory-style vehicle. And that is really nice when it comes to maintenance. That is a completely different animal to a hand-built, custom sort of vehicle like I did with Sergeant Rock or something like that. Now, that truck started out as a four-wheel drive, and it continues to be a four-wheel drive. Everything was completely reconfigured, but it was all hand-built. The suspension was hand-built. The axles were positioned just right. Everything was factored in. And that is a completely different style of build than something that you want to be kind of factory or bolt-in. So when you're jumping into a project like this, you really want to look at it and go, okay, what do I want to achieve? What am I trying to do? Do I want to be able to drive this thing every day and service it like it's a OEM style vehicle? That's a completely different style build than a full-on custom wowie zowie, something that is like no other. So keep that in mind when you're kind of laying out a project, because I'll tell you what, it's really easy when you pick up, especially an older vehicle, and you get to thinking, and you're like, man, I want to build something that's so crazy. No one's ever seen it before. And that's great, but that's really time consuming, and that's really expensive. And sometimes once it's finished, it's hard to service it. It's hard, for it to be something that you can drive all the time or utilize or even get replacement parts for. So bear that in mind when you're laying out a project. Make sure you're thinking it through. All right, that wraps it up for us today. Get out there and work on something. Spend some time turning some wrenches. And if you need some wrenches, make sure you check out Cornwell. They got all kinds of stuff to make your life easier in the shop.